Hey everybody, welcome to another video about the 4-cable method. Yesterday, I did a video talking about how we can sort of optimally set up our Helix with a real tube amp or a real guitar amp, utilizing it in 4-cable method. Okay, so today I instantly had some requests to do it for Stomp also. And I was kind of planning on doing that anyway, so I figured let's do that today and get that out of the way. And so the Stomp folks can have a good idea as well for anybody who doesn't. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who already know how to do this, and that's wonderful and great. But hopefully there's some tips in here that can help some folks do what they need to do. All right, so first things first, I'm gonna make this a lot shorter video than yesterday. If anybody has any questions about the routing, which I really kind of emphasized yesterday, please refer to the Helix 4-cable method video I did yesterday. I'm gonna have a link to that in the description for this video. So that's also a good video to watch even for this, but we'll kind of try to condense this a little bit. So let's go over to HX Edit. All right, so here we are in HX Edit. Now, again, I'm gonna describe this in the same way as we talked yesterday about signal flow, right? So first thing, the signal flow is coming out of our guitar. So I have my guitar cable here. Now, obviously this is called 4-cable method for a reason, because we need 4 cables to hook up the Stomp with the amp and get everything working, right? Just in case anybody doesn't know, I'm using a Rev G20 head going into the built-in torpedo remote, so that's what you're hearing recorded. Great little amp if anybody wants to check it out. Amazing product from the fine folks at Rev Amplification. So, our guitar is sending our signal out. Now normally we would take that guitar signal and plug it into the front of a guitar amp or maybe some pedals, which would then go into the front of the guitar amp. But since the Stomp is going to be our guitar pedals, we are going to plug this into the input, the guitar input of the Stomp. So our guitar is going to go in that. That's cable number 1. Now what that's going to do is it's going to get the signal flowing right through here, our main input, which is what we want. And then that leaves us our 6 blocks here. So, as I mentioned yesterday in the Helix video, you know, some effects, the whole point of the 4-cable method is that some effects we use work better in front of the guitar amp and some work better in the guitar effects loop or the guitar amp effects loop. So, what are some effects that work good in front? Well, you know, compression, wah, distortion to name a few. Some people like to put chorus and other effects there. A lot of time-based effects work better in the loop after any distortion or preamp effect happens to the signal. So usually delays and reverb. Some people like to put chorus there. A lot of that's going to be personal preference. But again, we could have delay and reverb as the best example in the effects loop. So how do we set that up? Well, we have our signal coming in here. I've plugged this in, my guitar cable into the input on my HX Stomp. So guitar cable to our normal guitar input. Now we send our signal through here. I'm going to add a couple effects here. I'm going to put in a Diana drive, overdrive, and I'm going to add a deluxe comp compressor, and I'll just give these some very rough settings that I kind of know I normally like. Yeah, we'll see what that does. Let me crank that up to there. Okay, this isn't really about, again, getting the sounds, but more just about making things work properly. Now, yesterday I talked about a bit of a nice feature of the Helix having so many blocks. I talked about using a separate send and return block instead of an effects loop block. Now you might be asking what I'm talking about. Well, let's go here to our next block, and this is how we start sending the signal to the guitar amplifier. So I take the send and return blocks here, and I'm going to add an effects loop left because I've plugged my cables into the left input, the left output, okay, the left return, and so on and so forth. So we're going to use the left one, not the right one. The Stomp is set up to be able to be utilized in stereo, but for this we're using a mono configuration. So that's it. So now what we've done is we have a loop that is sending signal out of the Stomp, and we have another part of the loop which is returning it back to the Stomp. Okay, so it's sending it out of the Stomp to the guitar amplifier and then returning it. Well, we have to set our cables up properly. So what we need to do is we need to take the send out of the Stomp and put that into the front of the guitar amp, okay, in our normal guitar input. So again, the send out of the Stomp is sending the signal out into the guitar input of the amplifier. So from stomp send to guitar input. So again, if we look at here and visualize our signal flow, our guitar is plugged in, it's coming through our compressor and distortion, it's going to this effects loop, which is sending the signal out of the stomp into the guitar amp. Now that signal is then going to pass through the guitar preamp. It's then, before hitting the power amp of the guitar head, it's going to hit an effects loop, which has also a send and return. So we need to send the signal back out of the send of the guitar amplifier effects loop and plug that into the return of the stomp, okay? So that's the next cable. So we have one cable, which is going to be our guitar plugged into the guitar input of the stomp. We're gonna have another cable, which is going out of the send of the stomp into the guitar input on the amplifier. Then we're gonna have a third cable, which is gonna come out of the send on the guitar amplifier back to the return, the left return of the stomp. So we have 3 cables used. Now, let's just go down to HX Edit, sorry, not to HX Edit, let's go down to the HX Stomp for a second. I'm gonna show you how I make some global settings that I feel are gonna be important to the setup here to get the 4-cable method working properly. The really important one of all of this is making sure that the send is set to instrument level, because the guitar amplifier wants to see an instrument level input, okay? So let's go look at how we do that. All right, so here we are down at our HX Stomp, and I just wanted to show you how you can make the settings that you need to make for the global settings for 4-cable method to work, you know, probably in its optimal fashion. You can see I have my connections. I had to kind of undo my pedal board here a little bit, so I apologize for the messy look. But so what we're gonna do to get into global settings, you can see here, it's showing the preset that we started on. So I'm gonna press the 2 page buttons. That gets us into our little hamburger menu here. Now I'm hoping this comes out clearly. You can see down here it says Global EQ Control. I'm going to page over right here, and now that says Global Settings. All right, so I'm going to press this, and that took me into, the menu here. I'm going to go up to my knob here and move over to where it says Ins and Outs is the menu I moved over to. Now, it says input level, output level, send, return, left, which is what we're using. So the thing about this is we don't have the same flexibility as we did with the Helix yesterday in the video I did for that, where we kind of assigned different send and return blocks. We really kind of probably don't want to do that because we'd eat up way too many blocks of our 6-block limit in the stomp. So for this, what I'm going to do is suggest that we just leave everything at instrument level, okay? Our send is going to be going to the front of the amp. So, you know, if I go and change this to line now, as I mentioned yesterday and showed yesterday in the Helix video, I'm going to be hitting the front of the amplifier with a line level signal. I don't want that. So unfortunately, we're going to have to leave that at instrument. So our return is also going to be at instrument. And then our output will also leave an instrument just so everything's matching. And I think that in most cases, that's going to work perfectly fine for most folks. Sorry about the focus on here. I'm just doing a handheld video with my cell phone. So that's the settings we want. And then after that, we can just get out of that and go back to our preset. All right, let's go back up to HX Edit. Okay, so here we are back up after making those settings. Unfortunately, a little less flexible than the Helix, but I don't think it's going to be a real big issue overall. So now that we've got that chain going, we now can add effects into the effects loop of the guitar amp. Because we've sent the signal out of the effects loop of the guitar amp back into the HX Stomp, and we can now put in here some effects. So let's do this. Let's add typical things like maybe a delay. I'm going to put a transistor tape, just with some settings that I like. And then I'll put a reverb. Let's see here, reverb. And like I did yesterday, maybe I'll do a little plate reverb, set it around there. Again, these aren't about the settings, but just more about seeing what we can do with it. All right, but now we need one more cable. We've got to come out of the main output of the stomp, and we've got to take that signal out and put that into the return of the guitar amp. So we've completed the flow. So again, a quick recap of that signal flow. Out of our guitar into the main guitar input or the main input of the stomp. It flows through these effects. It hits our effects loop coming out and back into the stomp. So the send of the HX Stomp needs to be plugged into the input, the guitar input, the front guitar input of the guitar amplifier. We then take our third cable, which is the send on the guitar amplifier effects loop, and bring that back to the return on the HX Stomp, the left return. Then we finally have a fourth cable to complete our 4-cable method, which is the main output of the stomp is going to be plugged into the return of the effects loop on the guitar amp, and I hope that's clear. And that should now set us up to be able to use our 4-cable method. I'm going to turn the effects off for now. Here is the sound with no processing. This is just the Rev G20 amp you're hearing. If I hit it really hard, it might get a little tiny edge of breakup. Well, let's see what happens if we put some reverb on that. There's our reverb. Sounds good to me. All right, let's see if our delay is working. Sounds good to me again. All right, so now let's see, leaving that on, let's see what happens if I put my overdrive pedal on, which should theoretically, the way we have it set up, be hitting the front of the guitar amp and therefore keeping our delays and reverbs sounding like we want them to. Let's turn that on. Great. And again, our compressor should work as well. Just getting the settings that we would want on that. Let's go real extreme. Works beautifully. So, works exactly as I wanted it to. Everything is fine. Now, again, let's just recap the signal flow. Our guitar is plugged in to the guitar input or the main input on the stomp. That flows through our pre-effects. That hits our effects loop block. That's going to send, we take the send out of the HX Stomp and plug that into the guitar amplifier input. We then go to the send on the effects loop of the guitar amp, send that out and plug that into the return on the HX Stomp. We then go through our post effects, the ones that are going to be in the effects loop that we have here, and then that's going to be, takes us to the fourth cable, which is going to go out of the main output of the HX Stomp and plugged back into the return on the main amp of the effects loop of the main amp, okay? Hope that makes sense. I just like to repeat that a bunch of times just so that everybody's clear on how that has to be set up. So as I did yesterday, I have, obviously limited blocks here. We have to use a block up with our effects loop, but I could move that so I could have more pre-effects or, more post-effects. One thing I mentioned yesterday is that we can change the channel on the amp as well, and it should still work. So I can go to my distortion channel on the amp. So this is from the Rev amp now. So that's the distortion of that amp. There is a tiny bit of noise today for some reason, and I did narrow it down to the USB being plugged in from the HX Stomp to my computer for some reason. So that's adding a tiny bit of noise. As soon as I unplugged that, that went away. Strange stuff. Anyways, not to worry about it. That's not a big issue for what we're talking about today. But one thing I can do is I can go to the really wonderful preamp models that we have on the HX Stomp and the Helix, and let's just choose the Placate or Dirty. And I have found that it seems to sound better when we put the preamp as the post effects, into the post effects. Now, one of the reasons for that might be is that, you know, these are the preamp sections of a full amp, and by putting them in front of the amplifier, we're actually preamping the preamp. So it's going to hit the preamp of the real amp much harder and maybe give us an effect we don't want. So by putting it here after, what happens is we bypass the preamp and we hit this preamp straight into the power amp section of the, in this case, the Rev G20, okay? So putting that in sounds like this. And obviously we can crank up the gain on that. And again, we can use our delay on that as well. It's going to work beautifully. And that sounds fine. Now, one final thing we can do, let's turn those things off, is we can then go, like I showed you guys yesterday, and assign these two foot switches. Now, obviously, we only have 3 foot switches on the Stomp, so we could choose what we want. Maybe we want to take our distortion pedal and assign that to foot switch 1. Maybe we want to assign our compressor to foot switch 2. So I've gone to the bypass controller assign. Now, if we do have a separate controller out there, you know, we can maybe, well, we could actually add that to foot switch 3. And maybe we want our delay on foot switch 5. We could use something like the Mission Engineering TT2 or the Morningstar MIDI controller. We could also assign it to those types of things. So we can assign that to create more of a pedal board setup once we have this set up. So we can just, at our toes, basically, at the tips of our toes, we can switch these effects on and off and get what we need out of the unit. So what do you guys think? I hope that was clear and concise and hopefully not as long as yesterday. Thank you guys for tuning in. I really hope that does help some folks. I think it should for anybody who had questions about how to set up their HX Stomp and 4-cable method. One thing to do though, if there are some questions in here that seem left unanswered, go watch my Helix 4-cable method video from yesterday because some of the things still apply here as well. So I'll put the link to that in the description below. As for now though guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Much appreciated. Thank you so much for the support. Please like the video, share it with anybody and everybody, and anybody who you think might find it useful. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the little notification bell so you get to see when new videos I put out come out. All right, thank you guys again so much for tuning in. I will be back very soon, and ciao for now.